Hey everyone, it's Nick with the Whip Shop. I'm here in the shop with Adam Winrich, and today we're going to be building a nylon bullwhip with one belly.
This is my basic collection of tools I use for whip making. Got a couple different fids, forceps, and lighters and scissors. Sometimes you need a pliers, so I want to measure stuff. And then I use artificial sinew for the binding. Sometimes use a little bit of dreaded electrical tape. And then hammer and some staples for securing my knot foundation. And then a little craft knife for cutting off the end of the whip. So I'm going to start out this whip. I got a about 11-inch handle. That's just sort of ran anywhere between 8 inches and 12 inches is usually good. And then I made myself a little paracord loop right here, and all my core strands, belly strands, and overlay strands are going to go through that. And this is how I'm going to hold the whip to the wall. This is going to go over a hook, and I'll just braid everything off of that. So I cut out some core strands. This is going to be a 6-foot whip. So my core strands are basically going to be 3 foot from here to the end. I'm going to cut 5 strands that'll be doubled over. So that means, let's see, one side, well basically this first one I'll cut about 6 foot. I guess, let's see, there's 3 foot. And then, so this is doubled over. Make it a little bit longer to be safe. So I'll mention when I'm cutting all of this stuff out, I'm not going to be like super precise. Usually with parachute cord, I mean, it's not that expensive, so I'm always going to kind of cut it longer than it needs to be. Just, it's something with whip making, whereas once you've done a design, like, I don't know, 20 times or something, and you keep a notebook, you can probably get that design really dialed in, so that way you know exactly how to make everything and minimize the amount of waste you're going to have. But that in itself is its own kind of headache, having things just barely long enough. So I kind of like avoiding that headache, especially since I only make whips now as a hobby. So I cut out 5 strands, so now these are all going to get looped through this loop, and then I'm going to use artificial sinew to bind them on. So April Choi is probably the only other person I've seen using feet in the process of whip making. And I don't know how or when I started doing this, but hey there, kitty. So I just take my roll of artificial sinew, unspool some, put it in between my toes, and then I put this on there. And since this rod is about 5/16 of an inch, that means that these strands, so when it's doubled over, it's 5 strands doubled over, means I got 10 strands over this rod. So that covers it pretty well. If you were using a thinner piece of rod, it'd be easier to use fewer strands. So if I went down to say 1/4 inch for the handle, then I would probably use only 4 strands doubled over to have 8 strands over the handle. There, so now so you see I can hold it firmly in my feet, and if I really want extra binding, I can put my hands on my knees and just go up, push up with my feet and kind of use my calves. So that means I can get a tighter binding. And pretty much in sort of the handle transition construction, this is about the only part I'm going to be doing a whole lot of binding. I'm not going to do any extra binding like over the belly. Alright, so I get to the end here. I'm going to hitch it off. And you see, if I, so there's a couple different options you could. I've made whips different ways. So we could just keep binding and let the core only be this big. But these 10 strands obviously aren't going to be as big as like 10 strands with this big chunk of steel in there. So I'm just going to add in a few little scraps of paracord. I think we'll go with 4 of them that I'm going to then trim off. And then these will be the sort of determine the start of the taper right off the handle. So I'm just going to double it over and kind of bind this on right at the end. And sometimes you can just add like 3 or 4. I'm going to add 4. Sometimes I'll add 5. Really depends how much weight you want at the end of the handle. And then let's do that. There. There, so those little filler strands are on there. And now I'm just going to come off the end of the steel a little bit like this. Just do a little bit of a light binding down. That's maybe like, I don't know, 1.5 inches or something. And then come back. Not really putting any tension on it here. And then just put in a little extra binding just to build up the diameter right here at the transition. Kind of smooths that out. And then come back on the handle. And then let's do a couple hitches to hold that in place. And then I can cut this off and then I'll trim the rest of this. So now basically I'm just going to give this thing a haircut. So what I want with all these filler strands is I actually want these to taper out pretty quickly. So I'm just going around and I'm only leaving maybe like, I don't know, 3/8 of an inch or so in between them. I don't want them to stick too far down in the whip because it'll be like too much weight. Let's go back with that one. Maybe make this one a little bit longer. And this last one there, a little bit longer there. And then now I'm going to start cutting out the strands with the core left in. And then again, these I also kind of want to have taper out a little bit faster at the beginning. Let's do that one there.
So those white ones really drop off quick then.
Yeah, they do. It's just sort of meant as a filler. And usually with a heavier handled bullwhip like this one will be kind of a chunkier handle. Okay. You want it to taper off faster. Gotcha. So I'm not going to carry them out very far. So about an inch. I'm going to cut out one more, and then I'll get out my measuring tape and see how long the longest one has to be, which I want it to be 3 feet from right there. Okay. There. Let's see, is one of these about 3 foot? Yeah, about this one. This one there. And now I'll kind of work backwards.
Okay.
To the transition. So these looks good. That one's probably good right there. So I'll sort of go through and do like a little preliminary trimming up of this, and then once I've done that, I can go back through and look at the shape and see how I want to adjust it. kind of the idea with most bull whips is you want it to taper faster off the handle, and then the taper will get slower and slower as you go down. So looking at it now, I might be still a little bit too chunky out here, so I think I'm going to bring these ones back a bit more. So that way I have less weight and a slower taper. Yeah, probably if I do this one there, between there. So that's not too bad. Now I'm ready to cut some belly strands. So that's going to be 12 plait, so I'll need to cut 6 strands. Ballpark, this would be maybe the shortest one. So the finished braid is going to be 3'6", and I'm also going to have some tails sticking out at the end of that for to work with the taper. So that kind of a general rule of thumb for how long you cut strands with leather is you cut it 1.5 times the finished length. So say if I was going to braid 3 foot, I would need to cut 4.5 foot of length to be able to get that whole thing braided. But leather has stretch to it, and you plait it super tight, or tighter than paracord usually in the thong. So I'm not going to get as much stretch that way. So what I'm going to do with this stuff, usually paracord, you cut it 1 3/4 the length that you want the finished braid to be. And because I also want the tail sticking out the end, that means probably my longest strands here, which I probably will end up cutting just way too long anyway, are actually going to be twice the finished length. So finished length is 3'6", so like that 7 foot. So probably my longest strand here is going to be 14 feet for the belly. Maybe I got 3 there. And let's see, 12. 2 feet there. I need 3 more, so I'm just gonna these next ones. Now I need to get the core out of all of these guys. You can save yourself time in some of your whip making if you buy parachute cord without the core in it. But there is a difference between the two of them. And I guess sometimes I like using it with the core in and then taking the core out. And sometimes I'd rather just use stuff with the core that's already in. All of these will go through my loop.
And you're just going to the halfway point of all of those strands then?
Yep. So this start, I'm going to do a 12 plait start, and this is basically how the same way that I would start like a performance hybrid style thong or cow whip thong. I would still have strands going through. This strand here would be the one that like ties your thong into the handle. And if you want, so I put 3 strands on one side, 3 strands on the other, and then half of them you see are kind of in the front and the other half kind of in the back. So I'm just basically bringing all the strands or all the back parts to the front one at a time. So I'm going to start on the right side and go all the way over everything at the top. Now it's a 12 strand braid, so I want to develop an under 3 over 3 pattern. So I've got 1, 2, 3 strands here. So this next one on the top, I'm actually going to go under and then over 3 like that. And along the same lines here, I'm going to work with my next strand. See the one that was in the middle. So I'm going to go under 1 and then over the 3 that are on the front. And this other side, make sure I grab the one that's in the back there. That's my middle strand. And I'm going under 2, over 3. And I've got this other one in the back. Now I'm going under 2, over 3. And then finally, the last one, I'm actually going under 3, over 3. And that's the start. And now I'm set up to start a regular 12 strand braid. So because this is the handle, I'm going to braid the handle about as tight as I can. Because on a bullwhip, the handle is the one thing you don't want to have shift on you. So that's why the handle will get braided tight. And then when I get into actually braiding off the handle, that part, the wax will actually tighten up the whip sufficiently so that I don't want to braid that tight. I'll actually just lay those strands pretty much in place and just keep the braiding neat. So I'm getting towards the end of the handle. So you'll notice, like, so now when I'm really pulling on it, like I'll grab it, I'm locking it over this finger. Most of the abrasion or tension is like really on my pinky there. And I might hold it next to my chest and really pull it tight, and you'll see it slip right there. And that's kind of indication of like how tight I'm pulling the stuff. And see how there, pull it in there tight. So this is firm and it won't twist or loosen up. But as I get off the transition, I'm going to stop doing that. And I'm just going to go into like regular thong plaiting mode. And you'll see that I'll be all of a sudden not working nearly as hard getting the strands tight. Some people may say that a nylon whip will break in if it's too stiff, but actually nylon only gets stiffer with age. But the only part that you can see break down on some people's whips is this transition point right here. And if this were all braiding, it'd be very easy for this braiding to slip off the end of the handle. Like if this was a braided core, it could slip off and then this gets all wobbly. But because these strands run straight from here all the way to there, there's nothing that's going to slip off. That's just solid braided paracord right there. So there's nothing to slip, which is why I think this is made better than trying to do a whip where all of the layers are braided. So it's just a lightly chunkier up here, so I'm doing more to push my strands up so I don't have any gaps.
And you're just about off the steel now, are you?
Yeah, almost. I'm still going to want to make sure my strands that are up here are still pulled in tight.
Gotcha.
And this, you see, we end up with a little bit of a lump right here.
Yeah.
And that part of that will roll out, and the other part gets covered by the little transition knot we'll put on there. So you can see I'm seeing where it's tightening up. I know I'm still on the steel right there, so I'm still making sure that I get some, see some slippage up there. It's one way to gauge your tightness of your plaiting, is to see how much of the strand slips right up there. So now you can see like this, basically there, now the tightness of the strands, that is off the steel. So now I can back off on my tension, and you can see now where I'm plaiting, when I grab the strand, I'm just grabbing it just between my thumb and forefinger. I'm not like going around and grabbing it like this. I'm just grabbing it just in between my fingers and maybe tugging on a little bit, but I'm more interested in putting the strand in place neatly.
Gotcha.
Than I am, see, I'm just grabbing it like there, and then really checking the back to make sure I don't have any gaps, and put it in place and make sure it's neat, but it's not, I'm not pulling on it ridiculously tight.
So you're about an inch off the steel before you start backing off, is that correct?
No, I'd say I'm right off the steel, or I guess where I'm plaiting is an inch off the steel, but because I was pulling in the strands tight, so my plaiting might have been here, like where my thumb is here, but where I was pulling on it, it's tightening up in there.
I gotcha.
So I'm still on my 12 plait, and as I braid down, just sort of going to eyeball it as to where it'd be good spots to drop strands. And when I drop the strands, I'm just going to leave them sticking out, and then when I'm done braiding, I'll trim them off and fuse them, because they're just going to be on the inside of the whip. There's no need to go through the trouble of trying to do a neat strand drop, dropping it inside.
I do the same thing. So do you ever find it difficult to kind of determine what strand is what, since you're working with those tails in the middle, those independent strands?
Not in this instance, because they all have the core inside of them, so they feel a bit different. So I'm not having any trouble. Usually, if it's in other whips I make, say like a 275 cord stock whip or something, there my core strands, I will have taken the core out. And usually where I get them mixed up is in these, like, say, lower strands here that I'm going to go over. Because you see I'm pushing them in, I'm pinching them together, and then I'm bringing the strand around. And then usually when I would come back to pull them back up to even out my braid or whatever, cinch it up, then it's real easy to like grab one of those core strands, but so yeah, in this case it's not frustrating, but in doing it with 275 cord or even with Dacron, it can get frustrating.
Gotcha. So at this point you are just laying those things in place with not much tension at all then?
Yep, you can see pretty much the most tension you see I put in is really when I'm bringing it around and I sort of stitch everything up. And I'm not even pulling on it, I'm just sort of giving it a little shake. So I'm ready to drop one. So normal dropping situations, you'd drop like one of these two strands, you tuck it in and then keep braiding. But because these are just going to get burned off, it's just, I'm going to, one of the short strands at the top. So to kind of get it out of the way, I'm just going to kind of hitch it up there. It's not necessary, but it keeps it out of the way. And then I'll keep on braiding, and now my pattern will switch to from under 3 over 3 to under 2 over 2. And then I'll braid a little bit more and see where my other shorty is. And then that one will also get placed up and out of the pattern. Now you can also sort of adjust the shape and weight of the whip as you're braiding. If you carry your braiding out like a little bit further, or your 12 plait a little bit further, the whip will be heavier. If you drop sooner, I just stick this one up in there, get out of the way. So now I'm just into my 10 plait, and I'm just doing under 2 over 3 on both sides. Almost ready to start dropping from 10 to 8. So let's see. At some point on this side here, I'm going to drop on my left side first. I'm going to switch to, let's see, under 3 over 2, because that's what it'll be after that strand comes up. Yeah, this one pops out there. Hitch that up over there. There, and now I got 4 strands on my left side. Nice. Braid a little bit. Now drop another one and be down to 8 plait. Basically what I changed it is, for whatever reason, this is my drop strand. I still want that to go under 3. So when I switched to basically under 3 over 2 there, I just wanted to make sure that this one was still going under 3, and you see the one right below it is only going under 2 strands. Just I don't know, it probably doesn't matter, but it gives it a little bit more of like an anchor. I think that once I fuse it, it would have to, like, for it to ever come undone, would have to come out from underneath 3 strands instead of 4. Or instead of 2.
Yeah.
But honestly, it's in the belly, so nothing in the belly is, like, for strand drops, is ever going to come undone anyway. But it would be possible, like, say if I rolled it like too vigorously and the whip flopped around a lot, that a fused strand could have the chance to come undone. Let's see, let's get this one further up there. So now the 8 plait is going to go down a ways, and I'll drop another strand once I have 2 strands in the core, and then when I'm down to 1 strand in the core, I'll drop down to 6, and then I will be at, then I'll do 6 plait, 5 plait, 4 plait for the little 6-inch section that sticks out past the core. I don't know if you can see, I mush it together with my fingers, but once we wax that, that's going to take up all the air pockets and tighten everything up. So now I'm going to braid down about, you saw my third to last strand ended about there, so I'm going to braid to about here, and then I'll drop out a strand, and then likewise when I get past here I'll drop out the next strand. So I'm kind of spacing out where my drops happen and where my core strands end. Shorty, is this one? All right, I'll wait till that one's back at the top. Goes that one. And then I'm just going to keep it under 1 over 2. So now I'm to 7 strands. short one is. All right, it's up there. So now I'm just down to 6. And there's different ways to do a 6-strand braid. Usually in leather whips, each side will be different. Usually on leather whips, one side would be under 2 over 1, and the other side would be under 1 over 2. However, for whatever reason, like doing it in paracord, always, if you do it that way, it kind of ends up like oddly oval, which doesn't seem to sit well with the whip. So that's why usually in nylon, I'm keeping both sides the same. In this case, I'm doing under 1 over 2 on both sides. And that somehow makes it more like a triangle. So now I'm off the core. So I want this, little part to be a total of 6 inches long. So I'm going to do my 6 plait here for 2 inches. And then drop out a strand, do 5 strands for 2 inches. And then 4 strands for 2 inches. And you can see it gets kind of bunched up here. This is not the most, not the neatest plaiting, and it's in the core or in the inside of the whip, so it doesn't have to be terribly neat. Let's see, what did I do with my tape? Yep. Next short one is that one. Yep, so this one goes up there. Now I'm down to 2 strands on that side. Yeah, I was just thinking sometimes you'll ask somebody who's a bit older a question about how to do something, and oftentimes you won't get the answer. And I think, like, why are the reasons you don't get the answer? And from my own personal experience now, having done this for a while, I can tell that sometimes I personally will respond better if someone has already shown me that they've made an effort and tried to do something. If they just flat out haven't done any effort and want me to give them all the information, then I'm just likely to just blow them off. Like, man, you didn't try. But if someone made an honest effort first, then like, oh, I want to help them out. I see how far they got. It's very easy to correct what they've already done and be inspired to help them. All right, so now I'm gonna just sort of hold this end part in place with a little wrap of electrical tape that will come out as I braid the overlay. So just do a couple little wraps. That's just holding it in place, like that. There, just like that. And now I can go back and trim all these off. So I'm gonna leave a little bit sticking out so I can burn them. Oop. Oop. Save these scraps for future projects. And then these ones, let's see, I'm going to cut one off right where the 4 plait ends. And then, let's see, next one's at 2 inches. I think I can do one more at another 2 inches. Now let's take a lighter and fuse those. If you want to have a cool lighter, what you got to do is go to a jewelry shop in Arizona or New Mexico, and you get a genuine either silver or nickel turquoise inlaid lighter cover.
Nice.
That's if you want to be cool, class it up
Fancy.
a little
Matches the whip color.
bit. So you can see the shape of the whip here. That's our thickest point and how quickly it tapers off, and then as we go, the taper gets more and more gradual. That's pretty much what you want with a bull whip. If we carry this weight out too far, the whip is just going to be really chunky and tiring on the arm. Ideally, what we want is a whip that does the work for you. Just gonna give this guy a roll. Really roll this transition part, that'll smooth down just a hair. That's probably, sometimes I think, not entirely necessary to roll the belly. I mean, it's going to get covered anyway.
Yeah.
But it's a nice habit to get into. And see, also see, you can see how much I can twist that. But like I said, it's all going to tighten up in the wax. So I cut out all the overlay strands. And it's going to be a 16 plait whip, so I cut out 8 strands. 4 of them are cut 22 feet, and then I would double them back over. And then we've got a 10 foot, 12 foot, 15 foot, and a 17 foot. And they're all like sort of middled right there. So I've got 11 foot of strands sticking out on either side. So that makes sure I should at least be able to get a 6 foot whip out of this. And now I'm going to do my basic start first. And it's the same way that I started my 12 strand braid. I'm going to start on the right side. Go over 4, and then now I'm going to go under 1 over 4, always working from the top down and from the back forward, and under 1 over 4, and then under 2 over 4, and yep, and then under 2 over 4. This other side here, and now we're to, let's see, is it that one? Yep. Now we're under 3 over 4, under 3 over 4, and under 4 over 4. So that's a 16 strand start. And now I'm just going to do a little bit of regular under 4 over 4 braiding to get up onto the steel of the handle. And then I usually like putting patterns in the handles, even if it's a one color. It just the changing of the textures is kind of pleasing, and also part of my, I guess, interest in whips is always in the pattern work. So I like being able to incorporate pattern work myself into the whips. So now I'm basically up on the steel, and I'm gonna switch to an under 1 over 1 pattern. Or I kind of left these 3 up top there. I'm gonna do the switch sort of gradually. So what I'm doing with my finger, I'm not sure if that's what anybody else does, but so I got this pointer finger here. I will, when I'm doing pattern work, I will lay down the strands I want to go over, and then I'll hold them down with the finger from the opposite side. So now I really am going under 1 over 1, under 1, over 1, under 1, over 1, under 1, over 1. So you can see I'm holding them all down.
Oh, yeah.
And now I can just reach through here. I pull that one tight, and then bring my strand through.
That's a good idea.
And then just sort of cinch everything up. Now, single diamond is a really tough pattern to braid and keep straight. I am not an expert at it, but you can kind of, when you're braiding along, you can look at each pair of diamonds, so like this one, this one, this one, like that, and try to sort of futz with it a little bit to try to keep them straight as you go down. So now you'll see I'll do the same thing on this side. So this handle's going to have some diamond plaiting in it, and then I'll switch to a gaucho braid for the middle, and then I'll do regular braid for the last third of the handle, and then that regular braid will continue off the handle. Yeah, I suppose I was maybe looking at the work of Tony Nugent that made me see that you could do like a patterned handle in one color and incorporate a regular braid pattern of, like this is 16 plait, so the regular pattern is under 4 over 4. But that looking at his work, that you could incorporate that regular braided pattern into other pattern work and have it still look like something, or it looks different. Because I used to think, no, pattern work, that's only like single diamond, double diamond, your sort of wedding bands or gaucho weave. The regular braided pattern has no place in pattern work. But if you set it off with other patterns, then it does have its own look to it. So again, this handle, you can see like I'm going through here, I'm futzing with every strand, trying to pull them all in and make sure there are no gaps. So that's probably the thing, is with diamond plaiting, it's the most time consuming because you have the most overs and unders of anything. So that makes it more solid as a pattern, and that's why it's often used in whip handles, because it's structurally very sound, but also time consuming. So now I braided about that much single diamond. Not really, I'm just sort of eyeballing it. And now I'm going to switch to wedding bands, and I'm going to do 2 bands that are 4 wide, or 4 strands wide, and then 2 that are 9 strands wide, and then back to 2 that are 4. So it's sort of like a skinny, fat, skinny kind of pattern type thing. So my first ones are going to angle to the right. So we do our under 1 over 1 pattern, but at the end you just go under 2 like that. So now I'll do the other side. Go under 1 over 1 under 1 over 1 under 1, and now over 3. And then cinch those in place. And we'll do the other side. Go under 1 over 1 under 1 over 1, and then under 4. Pull that in tight. Cinch that there. And now going under 1 over 1 under 1 over 4 under 1. So that last under 1 will start my next band that angles the other way. Under 1 over 1 under 4 over 2. Under 1 over 4 under 3. Go under 4 over 4. I wish I knew an easy way to explain how to keep track of this in a person's head. I sort of visualize it as if it were on graph paper, or basically think of each one of these bands going across as like a Tetris chunk. that's 4 things wide, or 4 blocks or diamonds wide. So I just know that with my pattern, I'm just creating blocks of Tetris chunks that are 4 wide, there. And then it's the top and bottom that'll kind of change, but I'm mainly focused on this one part is always going to be over 4. And that's why the other part is like, well, now you went over 4, now under 3. It's it'd be weird to keep track of, but that's sort of how I think of it, so it's not that tough. So now I'm going over 4, under 4, over 1. I think that's right. And then this over 1 here, that's the start of my 9 wide band. So I'm going under 2, over 4, under 2. On the other side here. And I'll go over 4, under 4, over 3. So I guess the other thing to think of is you see how these strands come out. There was like one strand in between them.
Yeah.
So this one comes out here. This one is over that next strand. Is over the next strand. So you just keep basically following that kind of pattern. You don't want 2 of them coming out from underneath of the same strand. You'll end up with a double up. So now, other side, over 4, under 4. Now we'll go under 3, over 5. Goes over 2, under 6. You can sort of see once you get away from the single diamond, where there's a lot of where there are fewer overs and unders, it goes a bit faster. So now we'll go under 1, over 7. And then we're going under 8. And now I'll come back over here. See, I'm always trying to keep my pattern, pushing it up, putting the strands in place.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to go, so I'm going over this one. So essentially I'm going over 9 strands. You can see how I'm using my fingers to try to keep my strands in place so not flying all over the place. Yeah. And now with this next one, I can finally, this is like the sketchiest part of it because I've gone over so many. Yeah. It's hard to keep that straight. So that's why I'm using my hands to keep it straight. Also, sometimes you'll tidy up the under part bit so that's not all too gappy. And now I should go, I've already gone under 2 here, so I'm basically going under 7 over 1. And now I can start the band that's angling in the other direction. And that sort of helps. Now it's kind of locked in place. So it's fat. So generally, a pattern's faster to put in like this, a real wide band, because there aren't a whole lot of overs and unders. But also structurally, it's not very sound. So that's why bands like this you can put in the middle of a solid handle, but you would not put it where the grip is, and you would not put it anywhere in the thong because it's too loose. It's too susceptible to getting pushed aside and getting floppy and loosening up. Let's see, where am I at here? I think I'm on this side here. So I'm going to go under 4 over 4. And kind of if you get lost in this part and you forget which side you're on, it doesn't really matter as long as you know what the pattern's supposed to be, or what it's supposed to look like, I guess. So now I'm going over 3, under 5. Or no. Yeah, over 3, under 5. Notice how the numbers always add up to 8, because it's 16 plait. Now under 2, over 6. And then this will be the over 1, under 7. And then this last one is just going to be over 8. And then this one's already gone under 1, so I'm going to go, I think I go under all 8, yeah. Under all 8, because I want that to be a 9 wide band. Let's tie that up there. And then this next one will go, basically it's already going to go over 2 automatically. So with my loose strands, it's going over 7 and under 1. And then now I'm going under 6 over 2. Then this should be over 5 under 3. So yeah, it's one thing with pattern work, like I'm always like turning it around, checking it, make sure it's doing what I want to do, make sure it's not gapping out. Now I go under 4 over 4. And then over 3, under 4, over 1. Because now I'm on the other side of my, see I did over 4, and that's over 4. This one's over 9. This one's over 9, so now I'm doing 4 and 4 again. So I go, see, under 2, over 4, under 2. And then over 1, under 4, over 3. And then I can finally lock down this last guy here. Scooch things out of the way. So it's going to be really good. Fit him in there. So this will be over 4, under 4. Next guy here will be, he's basically going under 3, over 4, sorry, under 1. Yeah, I think that's right. It's basically over 2, under 4, over 2. Under 1, over 4, under 3. And then I'm gonna go under 4, over 4. So with this under 4, I mean, I'm getting close to completing this other sort of 4 wide band. This is the second one there. And so now I'm gonna keep going, doing my overs, and I wanna get a little bit away from the bands, and then I'm gonna do a transition into the regular sort of whip maker's plait. And this transition, I believe I saw it on a pair of handles by Russell Schultz, and I liked it. Let's see, so I'm going over 3, under 5. And then we're going under 2, over 6. So I'm going to do one more of these under. So over 1, under 7. And then, so now I'm going to do this little transition-y thing. So what I want to transition to is a regular whip maker's plait. So basically what I'm going to want to have happen is I want to go over these last 4, just like in a 16 plait, you go under 4, over 4. But I only want one strand to stick out the back, or sort of out the side here. And this is going to be sort of the start of the regular whip maker's plait. So right here I'm going over 3, under 1, over 4. There, so that one starts that pattern there. And then this next guy is gonna go basically, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's under 4, over 4. And then we're gonna go over 2, under 2, over 4. So I guess conceptually, you can think about it this way, that you've got a bunch of strands that are always angling this way, spiraling in one direction. And at some point, you want to bring out the strands that are spiraling in the other direction in your normal plait. So that's why you're going to see that the front of this, you're going to see these strands angling this way, and they're cut off by where I introduced the part that crosses back the other way in the normal plait. So it'll look the same on the front and the back. And then, see, I think I go, yes, under 4, over 4. And then over 1, under 3, over 4. And under 4, over 4. And this side now I'm just totally into under 4, over 4. I think that's right. Did I screw this up? Technically, maybe I did. Alright, so I did screw part of it up, whereas I brought this one out too soon. This one actually should go under everything. So to fix that, just going to peel these back a little bit, just like there. I'm going to take this strand and just I'm too lazy to attach a needle to it or anything. Just peel them back and shove it through there. Yeah, it should have gone under those guys. There. So the first one I should have brought out should have been on this side. There. So that fixed that. Because what would have happened if I would have kept going that same way, I still have to bring this one around, and I would have had a weird double up in the pattern. There, fixes that. Some of this stuff is easier to draw on graph paper, and then it's an easier way to start visualizing it. And then after a while, some of the more basic patterns, you don't have to see drawn out anymore. You can just do them. There, so I fixed that. So that's basically the end of the pattern work. You can kind of see this is where your regular braid pattern starts, and then it's just angling strands that kind of go into it. So you're kind of cutting off the angle. So I should have done, this one should have come around first as far as when I was working the pattern, but I tried to do this side first, and that was kind of my mistake. So you do that one first, and then you worry about peeling this one up. And then from here on out, it's just regular braiding. So now I'm coming to the transition. I haven't gone over it yet, but notice I'm doing my hard pulling technique by really looping it around the forefinger and really putting the pressure on my pinky and bringing it to my chest and pulling tight. But as I come off the transition, I'm going to start easing back. And I guess maybe because I'm used to using stock whips, I kind of like it when bull whips have a bit more break at the transition, where they maybe flop like a little bit, where they don't hold like a perfect sort of curve coming off of it. Because then the whip, for me anyway, if it breaks more at the handle, it throws more directly from the handle, and I feel like I have more control of where it's going. So you see, as I keep going here, I'm gonna change my pulling technique. You can also see on some of these strands I'll grab it, let slide, and wrap it, and instead of like putting my pinky there, I can also use my ring finger and let that take the tension. So sometimes if you're doing a lot of tight braiding, finger might get a little bit raw and you want to use some other finger. But one thing about the transitions, I'd say in this type of bullwhip, particularly because the very core is solid strands of already braided paracord with the gut left in, that I know that's not going anywhere. So I don't need this transition to be braided super tight to make sure that the whip doesn't fall apart. In a leather bullwhip, you'd be really worried about the transition in some designs of whips, that the whip would break down at the transition. But that's with leather. And paracord is already braided, so it's already going to be more durable than, and less likely to break down than leather, because it's already braided. So I can tell that's about right where the steel rod ends, right there. So if you watch when I'm pulling on it, I'll do a little bit of slip. That's, I mean, how much that strand there shifts, but not a whole lot. And then once I know that I'm all the way past the transition, I'm just gonna, now I'm back to just holding the strands in between like my thumb and pointer finger, and just sort of making sure they're securely in place, but I'm not putting a ton of tension on these.
So what kind of tension are you pulling on those, Adam? Just to set them in place, what other action would you compare it to, so people can get an idea of just how delicate you are pulling the strands?
I don't know. If you were like stacking together a bunch of matchsticks, maybe. I don't know. It's maybe pushing together two Legos.
There you go.
Trying to think of. For me, the tension to put in the thong, it was a bit of a learning curve when I started, because I had worked with leather since I was a kid, and I never thought about making paracord whips myself until I couldn't find anybody to make what I wanted. And then when I started, I thought, oh, you got to braid tight, like leather. So I braided it tight, and they were just too tight, and those whips were not functional, or barely functional. Because because I braided them too tight, and the wax really tightened them up afterwards. So I learned that, oh, just ease up on the tension and then let the wax tighten it up for you. So that basically also means that, like, braiding this way, it's a lot less strain on my hands.
Very good point.
So the whip cracks better, and it's not that physically demanding to braid this way. So I'm going to be pretty close to dropping my first strand. Let's see, where's my shorty? So that's the shortest strand sticking out there. Yeah, I can go ahead and drop that. So let's see. Where is it? Oh, I got a few more stitches to go before it gets dropped. So one thing I usually do with these whips is once I've dropped a strand, yes, the next one, then I'm going to keep one strand running in the core, because the drop strand, there's that one, so he's going to get tucked in there in the back, and then I'll peel up this one, and now I'm under 4/3. This is what I call dropping out of the front. Like, for whatever reason, these strands here are the front, I guess. Because that drop strand is going to add a little bit to the sort of diameter, the bulk of the cord, just because paracord is kind of bulky. So once it's in there, it will add, I mean, this tapers off kind of fast, so that sort of helps hide the amount of bulk that the drop strand adds. But then I'll carry this strand at least down to my next drop, and then when I drop, I will cut it out of the core to make room for the new strand that's going into the core, so that way there's no jump in the diameter of the finished whip.
So right now you're just holding that drop strand along the belly underside, is it?
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it there in the back.
Gotcha.
And then my general rule of thumb, I guess, in this part of the whip is I like the drop strand to go at least 3 inches into the inside of the whip, or be braided over at least 3 inches. General rule of thumb. That's probably one of the things I would say with your plaiting that you want to, I guess, avoid, would be having drop strands pull out, because that's bad. So I don't braid very tight, but certain things like making sure the drop strands don't pull out, like that's something I will take care to avoid. The wax, I think, also helps the strands not pull out. If this whip will be waxed, if it were not going to be waxed, I would probably want to carry my drop strands even further, because paracord without the wax on it is kind of slick. Now I'm going to see where my other shortest strand here is, because I'm about ready to do another drop. So yeah, so he's about there. So when that's ready to, in position to be dropped, I'm going to cut out the strand that's in the back right now. And this idea of dropping one strand at a time, it's like one of the many options for dropping strands. There are many different ways to drop strands. And you see this method used in cowhide bull whips made by Leonard Wheatley. And I would say the cowhide he was using is of a similar bulk or similar size as this parachute cord as far as like thickness and stuff. So it makes sense that he would do a similar kind of dropping pattern, because he's trying to keep the taper of his whip even and not have like lumps and stuff due to the drop strands. So this one's going to get dropped right there, so I'm going to cut this guy out the back. There. Another bit of scrap. So as another note, so we cut this strand 10 feet, this first one that's getting dropped. This one's getting dropped in here. So you can see basically we've got at least about 2 feet extra here. So this one's going to go into the core, and I'm going to braid at least another 3 inches in 14 plait. And we could go back with our design and we just keep track of how much we had to cut off and then subtract that from the original measurement. So let's see, we cut it 10 feet, but if we have 2 feet of excess on each side, we probably could have got by with a 6-foot strand. But I think that if someone out there wants to go ahead and make like, I don't know, 10 of these, probably by the second one, if you keep a notebook, you will have all of the measurements down to the bare minimums, and you can go on making the rest of your whips like that. But for me, I only make bull whips like this occasionally, and because I do it as a hobby, I'm not as concerned with the waste. I'd rather have everything be a little bit longer, and then I can drop strands whenever I feel like, as opposed to like the strand being too short, and then I have to go through the frustration of dropping before I wanted to. I guess one thing you'll notice here, this will be sold as a 16 plait bullwhip, but the 16 plait only goes to about here, like in the thong. It's in the handle. It serves well to do the patterns in the handle, but then there's only maybe like 6 inches or something of 16 plait in this thong. And I remember when I was younger, as a whip maker, I used to think like, oh, I'm selling this as a 16 plait bullwhip. There has to be as much 16 plait as possible. Like you've got to carry it way down the whip. And it is possible to have that happen when you are tapering the strands. Like in a leather whip with tapered strands, you can carry your strand count down further the body of the whip. But I think after looking more like the work of Terry Jacka, it's better to drop your strands a little bit sooner and have the angle of your plaiting being, I guess, a little bit more at an angle, or I guess that you don't want as steep of an angle. You want like a less steep angle of the plaiting, so that way your coils like around, there's more like coils, I guess, of the strands going around. So it's that makes a whip that rolls out better, as opposed to one that has like a bunch of bunched up strands and a very steep angle. Let's see. Here's my next short one. So this next drop is coming up pretty quickly, and this one's going to be different. This one I'm going to switch and drop out the back, because I'm doing my 14 plait now, and it's going to be, or it is, under 4 over 3. And the next even number of strands to get to is 12 plait. So I am going to want to switch from under 4 over 3 to under 3 over 3. Let's see, so there it is. So this one's now, it's not here, it's all the way up here at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out my previous drop strand, and then this guy here is ready to be dropped. I'm going to bring him around the back here, and then underneath and around to the front, and hold it in place.
And you went
like
under
that.
all of them on the right?
I went under everything just to hold it in place and kind of help keep this angle right here.
Gotcha.
And then, so I brought that strand around, and now I'll bring this next strand around from the same side, and I'm going to go right alongside of it and over the top of it, and now that strand will hold the drop strand in place and give it a little bit of a tug, and then he can like just sit there in the back.
Nice.
And where did I get this from? You can find drop strands like this in Joe Strain's work and in Terry Jacka's work. You do not see it in David Morgan's work. I think you do see it in Leonard Wheatley's whips. And there are ways to avoid it. But what you get though is so you get this little double up right there, if you can see it. But it's funny that it's sort of in a place where people don't notice it as much as if it were on this part of the seam, which is where David Morgan's double ups happen. And if I wanted, I could have just flipped the whole whip over and made this be the front. And then I could have dropped these strands the same way as I dropped these ones up here. And then you'd have a drop that looks like this, where there's just a little gap you kind of got to mush the strands through to cover up, as opposed to this double up. And that's how Chris Barr would drop strands. But it takes a little bit more effort. And I've only been doing it on my 275 cord stock whips, because the way that cord lays in, I just get neater strand drops when I do that. Oh, I should also mention on the 275 cord, because it's finer, I actually drop 2 strands at a time instead of just 1 strand at a time. So that's kind of the other thing, is that I turn it over so that way dropping 2 strands at a time ends up neater. I'm ready to drop the other one out the back so I can get down to 12 plait. So this is my shortest strand. Bring it around underneath everything, sort of hold it in place, and then from the same side bring another strand around and scoosh that up in place. And then now I'm just braiding up my regular 12 plait. So I guess one thing you can see with the sort of the double up little strand drop thing is that it also helps. You can kind of hide it a little bit if you smoosh it together, like have it at a more severe angle, so that way both of them kind of like meet or are overlapping right where they meet the seam. Yeah. That kind of helps hide it a little bit. You will notice, like with this strand drop, so you get a little bitty gap right there, which is kind of a telltale sign of that kind of drop. And with this drop, you get the double up, but you don't get any kind of little tiny gap. But usually that little tiny gap doesn't bug people as much as double ups do, as far as like the cosmetic nature of the whip. I know I made 8 plait cowhide Indiana Jones style bullwhip for a guy, and because it's 8 plait, the strands are much wider, and any double ups you have are much more visible. And he sent me a picture and be like, "You made a mistake here." And I was like, "Nah, it's just how the whip's made, man." But on the same token, the way I'm dropping strands here is the same way, it was a similar way to how Joe's strain would do it. I think Joe actually would drop, like where I drop one out of the back, he would at the same time drop one out of the front. So he's dropping 2 strands at the same time. So on one side, you'd see this little gap thing, and right next to it, you'd see this little double up thing. And he made me a 2-tone 16 plait bullwhip, and he did the strand drops that way, so I could see the double up, but I had already been studying whip making long enough to know how you could hide or not have those double ups at all. So I went on some online forum and I posted pictures of the whip and my little critique about it, and included about the patterns. And like, I didn't know that Joe had to put a lot of time into getting that whip to come together. He actually had enough leather left over, or other pieces left over, to make a whole nother 2-tone whip. And so I had my little criticisms, and I was just a snot-nosed punk, and he was kind of pretty upset with me about it, and it took a long time before he ever made me another whip, because I was so damn picky. At one point he was like, "If that's what you want, just make it yourself, man." So yeah, probably this diameter I'm at here was 12 plait. It's about this. This is about what the diameter of a performance hybrid whip would be.
It would start at this diameter?
It started about this diameter, yeah. So yeah, I just did my other strand drops. This is like all 12 plait here. And then you can see a little divot right there, a little gap. That's where my drop strand sucked in, and the other two strands trying to make up the sort of difference in the lack of that strand being there. So now I'm into 11 plait. On this side I'm going under 3/2. And then just want to make sure this strand is under 3 inches of plaiting so it doesn't pull out. And then my goal here is to be to the 8 plait by the end of my braided belly. So there's the 10 plait sections probably not going to be too terribly long here. So the other strand out here, so this guy just gets, again, that'd be a strand drop out the front, and then I'm into my 10 plait section now. So I'll probably only do this 10 plait section about 3 inches or so, and then I'll be ready to.
Oh, wax is ready.
Oh. I need to work faster. I saw a thing online where somebody was asking about wax that would not get like flaky or turn white under stress. And one comment, I think from Rufus Roughcut, was to use soy wax. And someone else said to add petroleum jelly to the wax, and that can help soften it up.
Didn't know
So you wouldn't use like all petroleum jelly, but I guess they're both petroleum products, just with different properties. So if you wanted a softer wax, you could add the petroleum jelly. I guess mostly I would experiment with different melting points, because I thought it seemed to me that some waxes with like a lower melting point were just a little bit softer and wouldn't leave as much white residue. Let's see, how far are we at? Braid a little bit more, my 10 plait, and then get ready to drop. See which one's my shortest strand. This one there. So see, I almost got 3 feet extra on there, and that was my, I think, 17-foot strand. So I probably could have made that one like 14 feet and been fine. Some of these strands I'll be able to use for the knots on the handle, or maybe even for the fall. So it's not like it all goes to waste. And then this is dropping from 10 to 9. So now I'm going to drop out the back again. So I'm basically alternating drops, 2 drops out the front, 2 drops out the back, 2 drops out the front, and kind of alternate all the way down. be interesting to find out who out there has the time to watch this video from start to finish. I know I probably would not, but I suppose I'm in it, so I should watch it so I know what everyone sees. Like, oh man, I look like that in the video.
I'll be watching it several times.
Yeah, you will watch it more than anybody else.
I'll have it memorized. I get a lot of people from different countries wanting wanting my videos translated to their language. It's interesting. I think somebody from Russia actually did translate it into Russian. The whole video, the original video.
Like, they wrote down your text and then did a voiceover?
Yeah, or subtitles or something.
Huh.
But, it's interesting.
I'm limited in my foreign language abilities. Let's see. So, German. Meine Peitsche ist kaputt. So my whip is broken. Let's see, Swedish. Let's see. Vem tror hon att hon är? That is, who does she think she is? I could have thrown some swear words in there, but I don't know. Let's see, I could have dropped. So then go back. Yeah, I remember when I first got into whip making, or particularly nylon whip making, I guess after having made whips several years, it seemed like I could crank these out super fast.
Yeah.
Because I was very motivated, and then it's like the more I did it, the slower and slower I got, because I suppose the more and more it seemed like sort of drudge work.
Yeah.
And I definitely find that with my whip making now. I don't like doing a whole lot of it at a time. Usually I only like, at most, I prefer doing a couple hours a day. So now I'm going to peel off my little bit of my holding tape here, because there can be no E-tape in a whip. Heaven forbid.
The E word. Don't say it, kids.
Well, we're going to I use a little bit of it to even out the foundation of my knot. But otherwise, yeah, in the body of the whip, there's I'm not using electrical tape. Okay, there we go. This is a drop strand. So now we're off the belly, and I guess this is maybe where things get more interesting, and because what I'm going to want to do is basically I want to braid my 8 plait down to where there's 2 strands in the core. So I'll braid down maybe a couple inches past, or maybe right about to there. And once I do that, I will be running 2 strands on the inside of the whip from the 8 plait all the way down to the 4 plait. And then the 4 plait will get go from 2 strands down to 1 strand, down to no strands in the core.
So Adam, is there a particular part of whip making that you dread the most and just hate?
let's see. Trying to think. I guess probably the dreading part is like looking at a list of orders that I have and to be like, I gotta make all these whips.
Yeah.
And that's probably the only dread part. But because I'm only doing it as a hobby and mainly just for friends, there will be a little bit more understanding usually if I don't make their whip right away.
Right.
And also that gives me the luxury to wait to make their order until I feel like it.
Yeah.
And I can definitely tell that makes a big difference in like my enjoyment of the work is when I do it only when I feel like it, then I like it a lot better because obviously I feel like it. I'm not like got my head down like I gotta grumbly like I gotta do this thing, I don't feel like it.
Exactly.
Like no, I'm just waiting until I feel like it.
Makes sense.
But probably what gets me more motivated is when I'm making a whip to do a specific thing that I have in my head. Like say if I like want a whip better to do the 4 corners, or I want this whip to be volley faster or be better for tosses, is come up with an idea, execute it, and then the fastest I will usually ever make a whip is once I've made that first one and it doesn't do exactly what I want, but I have some ideas of how to change it, then that second whip will get made pretty quickly because I want to see if I was right or wrong about the changes that I thought about making. And I say that and people will be like, well, how do you know how to change it? And that'd probably be a separate video of be stuff you like can change in a whip. Let's say, for instance, with this whip here, this has kind of a thick handle, a steel handle, and it's nice that it has a heavy profile, like it says bullwhip, that's a bullwhip. But say if somebody was a performer and they wanted to do more like volley type tricks, like fast 200 whip cracking, but it has to be a bullwhip, I would probably go with a graphite handle. And I recently did a repair on a whip that I made, or a set of whips I made, where the graphite, I forget how big, it was thicker than normal, but that way the core actually didn't go over the whole handle. It just went like through the last couple inches of the handle, and then there was only a belly and the overlay over the handle, so there was less paracord in it to make the handle lighter, and that made it crack better, or he liked them anyway. So now I'm going to start dropping, and so all these strands are the same length, so that means I can drop basically I don't have to keep looking for which one is my short strand. I can just pick whichever one I want to drop. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'll cut out that shorty right there, is I'm going to always tie a knot in the one strand that's left after I cut one out, because I want them, after I drop this strand in, what I would like is I know that this strand will be the next one I cut off, so I would like this strand to go through say 2 drops or be carried a little bit further in the whip, so that way it's less likely to pull out. So let's see if that makes sense. I want to make sure I did this got dropped in, and so now I'm at 7 plat, and then this one with a knot will get cut out when I drop from 7 to 6. And that means this other one will get carried a little bit longer, and I'll keep alternating it that way through the rest of the whip, so that way those strands get carried a little bit further. And this could be one of those things, and it just sounds good, but really it doesn't matter. But on some shorter whips, you're going to do these drops here at the end a little bit faster than say like 3 inches. So particularly if you're doing that, it helps to alternate which strands actually get cut out of the core when you're dropping, so that way your actual drop strand stays in longer. Goes like there. Let's see. And probably the bummer with this parachute cord is that this end part here ends up being the, I guess, bulkiest, or sort of like weirdest looking as far as the plaiting, especially compared to a leather whip. In a leather whip, you would have just finer strands at the end, or you'd only come down to 6 plait and you'd be done. So now I want to cut out the one with the knot on it because I'm ready to drop again. So I'll do that. Boop. And then I'm going to put a knot in this one that's still in the core. So that way this is the next one to cut off, because this one's been in the core this far, and then I want to make sure it's in the core this far again before I do my next drop. So we'll drop that guy in there. And now I'm into my 6 plait. And in this 6 plait here, as I am going under 2 over 1 on both sides. Almost ready to drop another one. So now I'm gonna drop out the back. Just gonna look for my strand with the knot on it. Got that one out. Put a knot on this guy. So I brought it around. Now I'll bring around another one. There, like that. One more stitch there. I'll trim out the one with the knot on it. Okay, it's in there. Ooh, gotta put a knot on this one. There, now I'm into 4 plait, and I'm going to braid this just a little bit, and then I'm going to see where the measurement on my whip is, because I'm going to have basically 5 sections of tapering left in this whip. 4 strands over 2 strands in the core, 4 strands over 1 strand in the core, 4 strands over nothing, 3 strands twisted, and then 2 strands twisted. And so that makes 5 sections. So I'm going to measure this whip and see how long it is right now and how far along I have to go to get 6 feet. And then however much further I have to go, I'll divide that by 5, and then I'll make each of those sections like that long, just to even them out for the rest of the length of the whip. So hopefully I'll have some room to move. So let's see how far we are, how long we are. So steel rod's about there. So right at my drop, basically I'm at about, let's see, 54 inches. So let's see, 6 feet is 72, or 54 inches is 4.5 feet. So that means I've got another 18 inches to go. So we'll ballpark that. Let's say 18 inches divided by 5. So I'm going to make my last 2 core strands. I think I'll go ahead and make each one of these about 4. So that'll get me 8 inches. And then the last ones I'll make about 4, 3, and 3. And that should get me my taper. So now I'll find the one with the knot. That one gets cut out first. Down there. Oop. And then this next one get cut out at 8. There. Keep this. So this one might be, say, a little bit lighter in the end, because you can change kind of how heavy the bullwhip is by maybe making the belly longer. So I braided this belly out 6 inches, past the core. I could have braided it out a foot past the core, and that would have meant that this little sort of tail out section here of the foreplait and the twisted tail, it would have made all that much shorter. But sometimes if you tail it out like this a little bit longer, it makes for a whip that's a little bit faster, lighter, maybe easier to volley. But it wouldn't cut cans in half very well. So I have seen some whips, or I guess all the older whips I've seen in nylon, like ones made by Krista King or Gordy Peer, or whips made to Gordy Peer's design, is they would braid 4 strands right to the end of their last little core strand there, and then they would begin a 4-strand twist. And that's what I was initially doing. And then I showed, or I was working with a guy named Conrad Rustenberg of Whips and Whatnots, and Conrad did one of his whips, I think, where he just continued the 4-strand braid instead of doing a 4-strand twist, and then went from a 4-strand braid to a 3-strand twist. And I'm like, oh, that makes more sense. Like, why do more twisting than you have to? And looking back on it now, I did a little experiment of doing like a twisted tail with leather, and now I can understand that probably what those guys were copying with their 4-strand twists is what the Florida whip makers were doing with buckskin, and they were doing twisted tails. And you really can't start, I would say, the taper of the twisted tail, or what I should say is there's no way to transition from a 4-strand round braid in leather cleanly into a 3-strand twist. You can do it with nylon because you can just cut that strand off and fuse it, but you can't do that with leather. With leather, you got to go to a 4-strand twist, then a 3-strand twist, then a 2-strand twist, and you leave a little tail of leather sticking out wherever one of the strands ends. So I guess that is why those guys were doing a 4-strand twist at the very end of their whips into all the way down to a 2-strand twist. But you can just do like what I'm doing here and just braid it. Next bit. So I want this part to be 4 inches. Let's see where am I at? Yeah. Yeah, that's okay. So now let's do the twist. So I've got came over on my right side, or yeah, there. So this one's going to get left up here, and then these 2 strands that cross are going to get twisted together, and this strand up here, I'm going to start twisting it and bring it around. So I'll pull it in tight, start twisting it, and there, bring it around, and then these 2 strands get twisted together. So you can see that makes for a twist that where everything is kind of in there tight. There's no like one strand going over a lot of other strands. And then twist this for 3 inches and then drop out another strand. So one of those just gets popped up there, and then these 2 strands will just get cut off and melted, and that'll keep them in place.
Taper twist is nice because it's just such a fine point at the tip of the whip.
Oh, yep. Yeah, only if the whip's going to somebody that I know is going to do a lot of heavy cracking with it, then I'll just come down to a 4-strand point and tie a fall on. But pretty much for anything else, I'll come down to a 2-strand twist. There, so that's far enough for that. I'm just gonna hitch this off to hold in place, and then I'm gonna make a fall to put on this guy. So some things I need: a length paracord, and I'm gonna need a fid, a lighter, and a forceps. I kind of need to buy a new forceps. I sort of bent this one, but it'll work. So first, I am not used to using needles with parachute cord. I guess what I do is I just take a piece of stiff wire that I sort of rounded off the ends. I shove it in there, and then I'm going to fuse it shut so that's nice and round like that. Alright, and then I'm going to double it over, and then I can come back just a little bit there. And now take the fid, open up a little hole. So keep that open. Shove this in there. Like that. This gets fed through there. Now I'll put this over my twisted end. Back. So now I'll completely close that little loop around the fall, or around the end of the whip. Now I can back up a little more. That's a good light. Now this is a style of fall hitch I got from Conrad Rustenberg. So I'm like here, and I got my 2 strands, one going either side. So I'll take one and go around, back, and then through in between the fall and the point of the whip. And then I'll sort of cinch that one up tight and hold it in place. And I'll do the same thing with the other one, go on the other side. So go around and through, and then so you see I've got, they both come out either side. Now I hold them tight and I pull this down. Now I can tighten these up, and if you just leave it like that, I mean it'll hold together like this now, but it would come undone. So actually maybe you could like snip those and fuse it, and maybe it would stay, but it would be really hard to like replace the fall without losing a bunch of length of the whip. So what I'll do now is take the fid, open up the loop a little bit, and go back with the forceps. And now I'm gonna take each side that I had and pull it through to the round to the front. So if you can sort of see that. This is the way I had it before, where I had a strand coming this side and this side. So one's going to go around the back and boop, go through the eye of the fall, like there on that side. And then this other one here is going to go back around. This is the eye of the fall there. Go, come out.
And that is slick with those, just pulling it through with those
Forceps?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it's basically like that. So you can see each one of these tails started on the other side, and then I brought it around the back and boop, plucked it through the eye of the fall. And that holds it in place.
Nice.
And then I can pull on these two a little bit. And let's see. Now that's tied. Now I just need scissors and my lighter. I got
Oh, you got it.
Take the scissors. First I'll cut these guys. I don't leave them too terribly long. And then I'm gonna fuse these together. And I can trim off these guys now. And then with this fall, the other end of it, so this is the part that got fed inside, so I'll peel that back and snip that off. And then,
oh, that's how you do that.
and then pull this down that way. And then, so now the fall has a taper to it. It's 2 strands, and then that sucks out of there, and then now you just got 1 strand.
Gotcha. I always thought you took the needle and just went halfway through and then poked a needle out, unscrewed it so that you could have half of it hollow, like you just did there. I didn't realize.
Oh,
That's
no, that's how I do it.
That's cool.
And then I'm just gonna guesstimate at the length of the fall and cut that off and fuse this. There. So now I'm gonna flex it a little bit, and I can kind of tell where it stops flexing. That's about where the steel rod ends. So I'm gonna bind about right up to that point. Yeah, right about there, it's good. Oh, yeah, I guess I do the scissors for that part. And then now, let's see how sharp one of these is. See, I think maybe it's about like there. I'm gonna. I don't want to jam the knife into the steel rod. I think I'm a little safe. Okay. So now I can see, yeah, there's that little extra part, so that just gets cut off. And I can see, oh, I can't see the steel rod, so I can see, yeah, I could have cut right off at the binding. Sharper. Yeah. Trim this up with the scissors, I guess. And then I'm going to take a lighter, just go ahead and fuse all that. There, now I can build up my knot foundation. So with this knot, I'm going to make this one a little bit different than in a video I posted last fall. My usual method for doing a knot on a whip would be to put a braided layer, a flat braid, over this and then build it up and then do a knot. But I've since learned how to do a Turk's head that closes all the way at the end. So I'm going to do one of those for this video, So for my foundation, since the knot will cover that, I don't have to bother to do anything with that right now. And I'm just going to do about, I'm going to see how this works. Maybe I'll go ahead and do one wrap. So I sort of fuzz out the end, hold it with my thumb. Just put on there like that. I'm going to do about 4 wraps down and then wrap back. Pull that in there tight, just there, to about there, and I'll start wrapping back. Let's see, about to there. And now it's to sort of hold this in place and to kind of act as a little bit of filler to take up some of the gaps. I'm gonna just put a little wrap of electrical tape on there just to hold that there. Just like that. And then now I'll do a couple staples. I think I learned about using staples to hold a knot foundation down from Jim Hurlbutt. And then I showed it to Chris Barr, and initially he poo-pooed it. And then he tried it and was like, oh, I guess actually that is pretty convenient. Let's see, those are all going in. Now we can put a knot on that. All right, so I'll use one strand for this knot, and I cut this strand about 7 foot long. And like I said, I'm not really always used to using needles, so I'm just gonna go ahead and put in my little wire stiffener. I think this is something I got from Lauren Wickline. I think putting a little stiffener in there to tie the knot. No, I don't need that. So this knot I'm gonna tie is basically just a variation on a Turk's head. And the first thing you do is you just tie a 4 bite 5-part Turk's head. And you tie that and you go twice around, or you do 2 passes with it. See, there's some fuzzies on this teal paracord I'm gonna have to burn off. So this part here you should be able to look up on several different YouTube videos. And this fid is just a screwdriver that I ground down. And I learned about making fids with a screwdriver. It's better to find one that has a round shaft to it, because I didn't think about it too much and I made a fid out of a screwdriver and it had a square shaft, and then one knot later I learned that, like, why do the points of my fingers hurt? And that's because you're always grabbing the fid like this and you're really grabbing it hard. And if it's square, you're probably grabbing the edges of it. So it's just not that great. So now I'm just going to adjust my knot a little bit to try to even up the size of those squares in there, and sort of futz around with this. Make sure it's even all the way around. Check out the top. That's close enough. Now I'll do a second pass, and this particular knot will not start getting interesting until the third pass. Yeah, it's funny. Some people really like knots, and some whip makers don't. And I guess it sort of surprised me how many, like, I guess new paracord whip makers I would see pop up, and they would come up with all of these other solutions to putting a knob on the end of the handle that did not involve tying a Turk's head, because they just didn't want to tie a Turk's head. But I guess for me, building the knobs on the ends of whips, it didn't really become easy until I got Ron Edwards' book about whips and whip making, where I saw that he would just take like a strip of leather and taper it and tack one end on and wrap it around, tack the other end, and then trim it. And that was super easy compared to what I used to be doing, which was sort of like trying to build up random pieces of leather and string and hope that it would hold together. So that's why I like this method here of just doing a wrap of parachute cord and stapling it, or holding it in place temporarily with the electrical tape and then putting in staples. Makes it a real easy way to control the shape of the foundation, and to also make something that's like solid, easy to repeat. Okay, so here is where it gets special now. So normally you would just come up right through here, and that would be the end of your knot. But now what we're going to do is I'm going to come up in between the passes like that. I'm going to go under sort of everything right there and come up in between those two like that. And now I'm going to go through the rest of this knot, and I'm always going to go in between my first two passes, but I'm also going to go opposite of those two passes. So right now these are on top, so I'm going to go underneath. So I'm going to split them and do the opposite. So I'm going to go under, there, that, and now of course I'm going to go over and in between these two and go under. Over and under. And then I'm just going to go under those two. So I'm not trying to go under the one that I just did. So just going under the first and the second pass. There. So I keep that same pattern going, and then the crux of this knot will become obvious in a second. So now here we're to this spot where I've already split my pairs. So now, yeah, we're going to go under one. That was my first pass. and then we're going to go over one, which is the pass I'm doing now, where I'm splitting the pairs, and then we're going to go under one, which was my second pass. So that's what's creating, or what will create, a knot that has just a over one, under one pattern to it. So you can kind of see these outer ones here, there, going this way and this way. That was our two original passes. And then the middle ones that cross each other here, that's the pass we're doing now. And that's what creates the diamond effect.
Nice.
So now we'll go over the whole thing. So any spot that I get to where I've already split it, let's see, that one. So like here, now I'm gonna go, let's see, is that one? Yeah. So right here, this little butt here, that's my first pass. This one here is my second pass. And that little one stuck underneath there is my third pass. So I've got to go, I'm going to go over one, under one, over one. Just do that. And then done that. And now right down here, I'm going to go under one, which was my second pass. And then over one, and I kind of sneak in there and go over one. So it was under one, over one, under one. And you can see how this one that I'm going under right now, sort of, that one is right at the very bottom, so that means that's my first pass. And then now I can continue up where I haven't split it yet. So I'm not trying to tie this very tight now, because this knot is the kind of knot this will, once you tighten it up because of the over one, under one pattern, it'll become like a rock. It's become super tight. Yep, so now I'm in a new spot where I'm gonna go do the under one, over one. And you can sort of see it forming at the top, how it's closing up.
Yeah.
And it will just be a very clean checkerboard under one, over one pattern on the top. Let's see, this isn't one in the middle there, so the next one. And probably about the only bummer with this knot is, as clean as the top looks, the bottom is not that clean looking. It's not as clean looking as other Turk's heads. Because you kind of see here, you've got, like, from your first pass, you've got these bites that are kind of long, and then you've got some from your second pass, like here, this one's really short and hidden really well. And then you've got your other sort of bites from this third pass here that sort of sit in kind of awkwardly. So, I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it is kind of strange compared to, say, like, for me anyway, for other knots that I'm more familiar with. But I think the fact that not everybody does this knot, that makes it unique. So that's kind of why I like, now that I know how to do it, why I like doing it now. And should make sure to give a shout out to Glenn Ward of GJ Whips. because it was Glenn that was able to explain to me onto the phone how to tie this knot. Because I've also seen this knot on whips by Gordy Peer, but Gordy Peer would not tell me how to tie this knot. And for me, mostly just once I knew the gist of it, that you take your third pass and go in between the first two passes, splitting them everything, doing opposite of what those other passes do, and then just making it the diamond pattern. It was all pretty clear. But I guess usually how I remember knots is more from like a basic concept of just know this like one or two things about the pattern, and then you can tie it. So it's not like when I'm remembering this knot that I have to really consciously think about what every over and under is. I'm just thinking about the basic concept that it's based on. So it takes up less space in my memory. See, I'm not tying it completely tight, so we're gonna have to go through, of course, and tighten up this whole guy. And if you are tying this knot and you make it and it's like a little gappy, that means your foundation is too big. So if your whip handle were bigger, you'd probably just do like one wrap of paracord on there instead of two like what I did. Or if you tie it and everything is just too bunched up, then you gotta make your foundation bigger. Let's go under this one. And here's also where it gets a little bit wonky, where you see this is where like that was my first pass, and this is where my first pass comes up and starts my second pass. So I'm actually going to cross over the top of that. So this ends up with like just a little sort of divot up. I guess it's not the same sort of length as the rest of the knot. So it's not like the worst thing in the world. And then to continue the diamond part, I'm going actually a little bit past the starting point. Let's go up one more here to there. And there, that was the last pass. So now I'll just use my fit and pliers, and I'll tighten that up. But even with Glenn Ward explaining this knot to me, I had bought a set of whips from him that had this knot on it, and I figured I should before he explains it to me, I should give it a try on my own to try to figure out how the heck to do it. And I'm used to other knots where like you're always like working, always going above something, or always working at going below something. You're never like going like above it one way and then below it another way, if that makes any sense. So my initial concept of how this knot was made was not correct, but definitely having made that frustrating effort first, and then being told the answer and having everything make sense, it felt a lot more satisfying getting that answer. But of course now, anyone that watches this video maybe knows how to do this knot. And so I'm done tightening up my knot. So this isn't maybe the neatest way to finish knots, but this is what I do. So all I do is take a scissors and I cut it pretty close to the end. I just leave a little tassel out, and then I'm gonna burn that with a cigarette lighter. Now, some people, maybe like Torrance Fisher, probably Nick Schrader, are better at hiding the ends of their knots, and maybe someday I could get better at it too. I've also, what I do, at one point I took a soldering iron and I ground it down so it was sort of like the end of my screwdriver there, so it's like more like a blade. And then I'd heat it up, and you could take it and go and use it to cut that end real smooth. But that was like a whole nother process. And I don't know, just using the lighter goes pretty fast. With here, it's a little bit of a bummer because the this stuff apparently like burns and becomes black, so it kind of stands out. So this method is probably the best used on a black material, because then the fused part almost becomes imperceptible. But anyway, there's our knot. It's now ready to roll it, and I got to put a knot right there. All right. So all I'm going to tie on my transition knot is a Spanish ring knot that I got out of Bruce Grant's book, and it goes together pretty quick. Let's just sit down and do it. So actually what I'm going to do, you can see where the swell is right there, so probably my knot is just going to be right behind the swell on the handle side of it. So you start out by tying a 5-bite 3-part Turk's head. And then you do an interweave that makes it the Spanish ring knot. And then, so I'll kind of get it into position. And I'll also try to sort of match up these burned ends with these burned ends. And then, with any luck, when I take my picture of the whip, I can hide them both on the opposite side of the picture. So that way they don't show up on Instagram. And then, my wife Dakota, however, always wants to make sure that they show in the pictures. So that way a customer can't complain later on. Be like, this whip has a defect. Yeah, as I go, I'm trying to pull it in tighter and tighter. If I pull the whole thing as tight as I can, it'll end up a little lopsided in spots. pliers. Pull on the end there. That's about right. So if I'm a little bit more careful trimming these ends, maybe I can have a little bit less of that black burned part showing. But also, particularly with this knot, what you'll see is you see how wide it is, and I haven't rolled it yet. So when I rolled it, this knot is going to squish out, and like the paracord will relax. And that can be a real problem if I didn't fuse these ends and get enough little burrs stuck up, that it'd be real easy for the paracord to slip out and for part of the knot to loosen. And so that's, I guess, one reason why I'll tolerate the ugliness of the burnt ends like this, because I know when I go to roll the knot, those ends will keep the knot from loosening. So I'll just give it, I guess, a light roll too, so it doesn't get too squished out. There, so it's only a little bit flatter. Moment of truth.
Here we go.
Gonna put this whip in the Whiz-Axe. Ooh, that's a deep wax path.
And we got, let's see, you can poke around with that little piece there. Cool.
Yeah, let's let it sit in there till no more air bubbles come up. So most of the air bubbles are out. That's good enough. So I'm gonna scrap it by the skinny end, and we'll wipe all the
You can tear that
excess.
in half if you want to with that towel. It's a rag. You can just, I don't know if it'll help you, but.
So use this old towel, grab that part there, and then because the rest of the whip's gonna be super hot.
Mm-hmm. There it is.
And sort of straighten this part out, then we'll go lay it out and let it cool down. Or actually, I could probably attach a cracker before it cools off.
Sure.
Let's put a cracker on it, like what I usually use in my shows. It's 2 lengths of poly string. Snip that. And then I find this stuff doesn't twist up very well with a drill. So I'm just going to tie it. I'll tie it onto the end of the whip. Like so. And now let's twist it right on the whip.
How long have you been tying crackers like this, Adam?
Basically since I met Ben Hughes, and I met Ben in 2006. And then I'm pretty sure that's how I saw him do it. So that's how I started doing it.
Cool.
And then I saw him a year later, and I was tying a cracker like this, and he was like, "Who taught you how to do that?" I was like, "I saw you doing it." So I'm guessing it was a rarer thing for him. Maybe he just did it on a whim at one point, and then I thought, "Oh, that's how you do it." But I do find that with this stuff, I think hand twisting it gives it a better twist than like trying to twist it with a pencil or a drill.
Yeah.
And like I mainly use this stuff because it doesn't tangle as much as nylon. It doesn't last as long, but I also like how it sounds compared to nylon crackers.
Cool. That is the last step of whip making. Photographing it.
We finished building this whip. Now we're gonna take it out and test crack it.
Let's do it. Beautiful morning. All right. So here we go, guys. This whip's done. Time to try it out. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you go check out Adam's channel. He's got a lot of great videos up on there. Go try this build out for yourself. It's an awesome build. It's quick. Give it a try. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, share with your friends. See you in the next one.
I think it's sucking the juices out of that fly.
He's having breakfast.
When I left Texas, there were about 20 spider webs around my trailer.
Yeah.
Go up, spider, go up.
There
he
he
goes.